welcome back to the Midlife Transit series. This is the fourth video in the series, the Saturn opposition. In prior videos, I walked through the Pluto square, the Neptune square, and the infamous Uranus opposition. If you haven't watched those videos, I invite you to do so, especially the Uranus opposition, because the Saturn opposition comes off fairly quickly after the Uranus opposition, and they really play off of each other. One is pushing us towards something new and undiscovered, and the other is reminding us of our past and the structures that we've held in place, our responsibilities, and encourages us to be cautious and to set up proper foundations before we head off into uncharted territory. So before I begin, I'd love to invite you to sign up to a newsletter that I'll be launching shortly. I'll first give you a freebie that shows you how to track these transits and these cycles in your own chart. And then I'll be launching a series that focuses on questions from my audience, and I'll be using the chart of the moment to guide my answers. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I invite you to go to www.gohigherfrequency.com and sign up for my newsletter. I'll link it below. Thank you. Okay, without further ado, let's start exploring Saturn and the Saturn opposition. Like my previous videos, I'm going to start with the planet Saturn and exploring how it shows up in our solar system. I think it's important to look at these archetypes in a variety of ways, and it's helpful to really do your own research because, as we learn certain, frameworks of these planets from another person's perspective. And depending on their perspective, they could have learned this from another teacher. Hopefully they've been studying and adapting their knowledge as they go, because our knowledge of these planets evolves over time. And we get new information all the time, especially about our solar system. And I feel like being a traditionalist kind of hampers you in a way, because a lot of traditionalists really lock into this ancient way of studying the cycles and this ancient understanding of these planetary archetypes. And I think that limits us. It's kind of like Saturn versus Uranus. I think we evolve as the cycles evolve, our awareness evolves, and we should adapt as we evolve as a people. And if you get too rigid about things from the past, then it limits your consciousness and it limits the ways that you interpret these archetypes and how they show up now in our present life as we've changed. Also, our understanding of things change. Now, I'm very much a believer that you should be well-rounded. You should study the history. You should understand all of the things as much as you can that has happened in the past, especially as far as, the data over time. I think there's something to be said for studying something that has been proven to be true and to adapt according to the times and the evolution that we've seen over time. So I encourage you to do your own research and to keep learning these things. Okay, let's begin with the planet Saturn. Saturn is the sixth planet from the sun and is the second largest behind Jupiter. It is the last planet visible to the human eye. This is very important, and I'll talk about this in a minute. It has a very strong magnetic field emanating from its core and a strong gravitational pull because of its 146 moons. The largest moon, Titan, is slightly larger than the planet Mercury and is the second largest moon in the solar system behind Jupiter's moon, Ganymede. And to put that into perspective, Earth's moon, our moon, is the fifth largest. But get this, it is less dense than water. being made up mostly of hydrogen and helium. And if a body of water were large enough to contain Saturn, it would float to the top. Despite this lack of density, Saturn's volume is greater than 760 Earths, about 95 times Earth's mass. It generates more power than it receives. As the most massive planet in the solar system after Jupiter, the pull of Saturn's gravity has helped shape the fate of our solar system. It may have helped violently hurl Neptune and Uranus outward. Along with Jupiter, it might also have slung a barrage of debris toward the inner planets early in the system's history. A 2017 study suggests that Saturn, more so than Jupiter, steers dangerous asteroids away from the Earth. Mysterious spokes have been seen in Saturn's rings, which appear to form and disperse within only a few hours. Scientists have conjectured that these spokes might be composed of electrically charged sheets of dust-sized particles created by small meteors impacting the rings, or by electron beams from the planet's lightning. This image evokes in me kind of a static electricity that also acts as a shielding agent, keeping the inner core of Saturn, this weightless planet, protected, as well as assisting the deterrence of harmful debris moving past the planet toward the inner planets, including the Earth. And Saturn's rotation is very fast, rotating once every 10.5 hours. The planet's high-speed spin causes Saturn to bulge at its equator, or the middle of the planet, and flatten at its two poles, the top and the bottom of the planet. Saturn has a strange hexagon-shaped jet stream around the North Pole. This is a new discovery, but I wanted to point it out because the hexagon is often used as a spiritual symbol. So I wanted to look at the hexagon a little bit. So even though this phenomenon is new, it adds depth to the spiritual symbolism of Saturn, because Saturn is often referred to as a spiritual planet. You can find the hexagon in many ancient symbols. In sacred geometry and ancient sagas, the hexagon represents the potential for life. It is found in sacred shapes like the flower of life, which is seen in ancient architecture around the world. When you draw a six-pointed star or a hexagram, the points form together as a hexagon. Because of its two interlocking triangles, the hexagon as a symbol often stands for harmony and balance, and also male and female energy. This symbolism is congruent with the mythology that exists regarding Saturn, which we'll discuss in a moment. Simply from this astronomical perspective, you can see why Saturn is sometimes described as the boundaries between, and why it symbolizes the structuring or restriction of some aspects of our lives. But like the planet, there's a higher purpose for these boundaries, these restrictions. To give a simple, mundane example about the importance of guarding the threshold and creating boundaries that are healthy, I found in my own spiritual and mental health journey that I really need to watch what I was feeding my mind on a daily basis. I had to stop watching so much news and getting sucked into apocalyptic zombie and murder stories. I used to love murder mysteries and real life murder mysteries. I was always wondering and fascinated, what is wrong with these people that are going out and killing others? And I thought if I could understand it, I guess I thought I could control and keep it from happening to myself. I'm not sure why, but I used to actually read a lot of materials on serial killers and stuff like that. And I just started to notice how it started affecting my mental health. And I made a concerted effort to feed my mind with healthier content. And I felt so much better when I did that. We have to add some healthy boundaries for our mental and spiritual well-being. And Saturn is representative of that boundary. And this is an interesting topic because it relates to what is going on here in the US. There's this battle about censorship between both political parties, and for different reasons. One party wants to restrict one thing and another wants to restrict something else. And it's really about controlling our consensus reality, depending on that party's belief system and agenda. But beyond party lines, I think we need to have a more healthy dialogue around this topic. It really starts with investing in education around mental health, which we aren't investigating in the moment. And there's a balance, of course, between restricting and expanding and what you're restricting and what you're going toward. And it's important to be conscious of that balance. But Saturn plays this role of keeping destructive elements out. And it could also, in the same sense, limit our expansion and growth if we aren't approaching Saturn's restrictive nature in a balanced way. So it's challenging to kind of provide a solution forward because, there's a fine line, and it really depends on your belief system. But investing in the education for our society about the harms of going down these specific rabbit holes and how we all need to manage our mental health a lot better, I think is important. And right now we're kind of veering off into where, even education is siphoned off. And so education isn't equal in our country. And mental health is becoming a real issue. So while this topic is divisive, I think at some point we all have to kind of look really hard about how the mental health of our country is also affecting each other. So there's got to be kind of a compromise there. In traditional or Hellenistic astrology, because there's no awareness of the outer planets, Saturn was the final planet used in astrological analysis. Even today, with awareness of the outer planets beyond Saturn, some traditionalists ignore the outer planets altogether. From what I understand, they don't see the outer planets as having any personal impact because it's not visible to us. They also think we don't have enough data, from what I understand, about these planets' influence on us. Some traditional astrologers do interpret the outer planets as influential, but from a wider collective lens. From a modern astrology perspective, it's perfectly natural in that perspective for the outer planets to symbolize the parts of our psyche we aren't aware of. In fact, these non-visible planets symbolize what is hidden or beneath the surface in the collective and within each of us. And then there's the question of time, and that's certainly a Saturn question. How much time does it take to integrate new symbolism into our collective consciousness? From this astronomical perspective, I think it's interesting to also think about the makeup of Saturn's density in regards to its symbolic spiritual nature. It is commonly believed that the density of the Maya is what keeps us trapped in the delusional nature of the mind, and that to ascend, one must first escape this density. In a spiritual context, Maya refers to the concept of cosmic illusion, meaning that the physical world, and as we perceive it, is not truly real, but rather a projection or veil that obscures the underlying reality of a unified divine consciousness. Essentially, it's the idea that the world is not as it seems, and our perception of it can be misleading about its true nature. I think, beyond this kind of woo-woo explanation, I think there's a point when in your spiritual journey that you start to understand that we each have limited perspectives of truth. We each are born into a country with its own cultural, beliefs and ways that we interact with the world, the understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And if you travel around and if you mingle with other perspectives and cultures, you really clearly understand that your perspective is limited, and the perspective of what you're going through is limited. And in that way, I think on the spiritual journey, there's a point where you can kind of ascend that. I have been going through that journey quite intensely the last few years, and I've had so much cognitive dissonance in my own experience around this topic that I'm starting to understand this at a deeper level. And my mind and the way that I view the world from many different perspectives, I've sort of always been this way, but at the same time, it's my point of view has been limited, even if I look at multiple perspectives. And I think I'm finally kind of ascending that, I hope. But I think that's the first step, is to recognize that everybody has their own perspective, a unique perspective, depending on where they're born and the family systems that they're born into, and what they were taught at the end of the day. And that very nature, and why I brought up the example of, the spiritual and mental health, I think it's, the astrology can be the map of your consciousness and the mental patterns that you have. And Saturn can represent kind of an archetype that talks about these boundaries of perspective and keeping harmful elements out. It can also, this astrological chart we're both spirit and matter. So it can be quite literal, and it can also impact us emotionally and from the mental perspective, mental perspective area. So when people kind of, deny one or the other, I think they're missing the point, because, this is kind of a map of our consciousness. And of course, things happen to us materially, along with psychically and emotionally. So I just don't think it's as clear cut as everybody likes to think about these things in astrology. It's kind of like astrology and the different traditions of astrology is kind of a microcosm of a macrocosm. Everybody has their own beliefs around what's right, what's wrong, and which system is right, and which house system is right, and which tradition is right, and each one of them have their own logical arguments that make sense. But when you take a wider view, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is applicable here, and I can see how this works there. And I think that's, a real big lesson of Saturn, is the boundaries of, what keeps us stuck in kind of a rigid mental patterns and belief systems, and what keeps us healthy. It's a real fine line. We've got to have Uranus that kind of infuses some new energy every once in a while. We've got to let go of the old belief systems to kind of embrace the new, and you have to do that. And Saturn, we go through different Saturn cycles to be able to cross over, to be able to let go. And I think those times can be quite harsh, but also liberating once we kind of get past the old and embrace the new. Okay, let's go into the mythology. So what I found during my brief research into the mythology of Saturn confirms this multi-layering of Saturn as an archetype, which I think doesn't get highlighted enough. In Roman mythology, Saturn was a god associated with agriculture, wealth, and time. Saturn was closely linked to the concept of the Golden Age, a mythical period of great prosperity and peace. There was a very benevolent and nurturing side to his personality, as viewed by the people of ancient Rome. He founded the city Saturnia and ruled wisely. This was a peaceful era, and the people lived in prosperity and harmony. Roman myths say that Saturn helped people of Latium to turn away from a more barbaric lifestyle and to live by a civil and moral code. Very Saturnian. Saturn also supposedly gathered together the wild races of the nymphs and fauns from the mountainous regions and gave them laws, as the poet Virgil describes. Thus, in many stories and fairy tales, Saturn is associated with those two mythical races. After the Roman Empire spread to Greece, they took on various aspects of Greek mythology as their own. The wealthy classes even had Greek tutors for their sons. Therefore, many of the ancient Greek gods became one with the Roman gods that had already existed. Now, I think it's important to point out here that this cross-cultural mixing of mythologies and religion is not isolated and can often be glossed over when discussing the origins of, of anything, of a faith, a spiritual modality. And I think it doesn't get enough care because, people always talk about original sources to things, or what's the right way to do things based on the past. And there's limited understanding about how everything's kind of been mixed together. And there isn't really an origin of something. It's, most of the things that are here have existed before. Even like Christianity, which is quite interesting to think about, I think. If you're from a Christian background, and people are so stuck into thinking that their faith is a one truth faith, just like astrology. My version of astrology is the best astrology and it's the most accurate astrology. I just see this all over the place. Anyway, back to the mythology. So the Roman god Saturn was linked with the ancient figure of Kronos due to the fact that they were both agricultural deities. Roman mythology has taken on many of the stories about Kronos and attributed them to Saturn as well. There is no evidence that such stories about Saturn existed before the Romans came in contact with the Greeks. Now we find stories of Saturn having swallowed his children out of the fear of usurpation, and of Saturn's war with his youngest son, Jupiter, the most powerful of the Roman gods. And, I think it makes sense, the struggle and, the especially as it relates to the old versus the new, the progeny versus the father, that struggle. I see it like happen in real time. This kind of like, okay, are we going to go with the older traditions and what we've been brought up with, or are we going to advance into something new? And there's a struggle and conflict between the two. One way in which the Roman myths differ from the Greek myths is the fact that Saturn's golden age came after his defeat at the hands of Jupiter, when he came to Latium to live among the people there and teach them the ways of farming and harvesting crops. The Romans believed that Saturn was a benevolent deity who stressed the importance of peace and equality, and these are all things that the Saturnalia festival is a tribute to. As such, they make a stark contrast between his behavior regarding his own children. In Western esotericism, there's another layer. Saturn is linked to Binah, reflecting its attributes of structure, discipline, and limitation. And Binah is related to the yoni, the womb, the priestess card, the occult tarot. These associations emphasize Binah's role in nurturing and bringing forth new life, as well as its connection to hidden wisdom and the feminine divine. So it's interesting because they say that that Saturn represents, a lot of people say Saturn represents the father or an older male authority or teacher. And this depiction reminds me of the Old Testament God, to be honest, who was to be feared. And if you didn't follow his laws, you'd be seriously punished. If you, it's like you have these really strict laws, and you could not eat certain things, and you could not act in certain ways, or you'd be, your life would be ended. And I feel like that's just like they came up with the Bible. That's like an older Testament God, and like part of God. And then they united it, with God's Son, and, and then there's the Trinity. But it's just interesting to think about Saturn in that way. And in evolutionary astrology, Saturn represents family karma. So it's like, yes, the old ways of doing things. And what did we inherit from our fathers? But we also inherit from our mothers. So it's really interesting to me Also because, women do act as the role of, the leaders of the family unit. And a lot of the times, men can bristle around that because they want to party and they don't really want to be in this confined role of the family. And so, women get a lot of flack because they need to raise their children and there's certain practical things that they need to set in place. So I can totally see Saturn symbolizing this feminine divine. And I think from an evolutionary astrology perspective, that's why, the fourth house, usually some people say that represents the mother, and the 10th house represents the father. But those roles can be flipped in evolutionary astrology because it really depends on who has taken those roles of responsibility. And so who is the nurturer in the family and who is the strict disciplinarian, and they might be mixed. But I wanted to address this idea that Saturn represents past karma, which addresses some of the research into the mythology of Saturn I've already discussed. I pulled this quote from Liz Green's book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. I realized that I had her book from a while back and I went to revisit it, it was a good revisit, but she didn't really have a lot there, like her Neptune book about the mythology. She had an introduction and then it was more personalized. And it was a really great, refreshing look on Saturn through the signs. So I definitely recommend it. But this is a quote from her intro. By his sign and house position, Saturn denotes those areas of life in which the individual is likely to feel thwarted in his self-expression, where he is most likely to be frustrated or meet with difficulties. In many instances, Saturn seems to correspond with painful circumstances which appear not to be connected with any weakness or flaw on the part of himself, but which merely happens, thereby earning the planet the title Lord of Karma. This rather depressive evaluation remains attached to Saturn despite most ancient and persistent of teachings, which tells us that he is the dweller of the threshold, the keeper of the keys to the gate, and that is through him alone that we may achieve eventual freedom through self-understanding. And now I want to move on to highlight a book that I used as my key source of understanding the themes of Saturn. And when I was approaching this presentation, I have been in the middle of my own Saturn trine now, but it's also conjuncting my Venus, and it's been quite restrictive, and I've been experiencing in especially the retrograde a lot of my own hard lessons, and it's been quite harsh, as you would say. So I really wanted to open my perspective on what Saturn was meant to teach me. And there's this book, which you'll see on the left-hand side, which is Saturn, Spiritual Master, Spiritual Friend. It was written by Robert Wilkinson. He's an astrologer, which I discovered on Facebook. And I discovered him by his post in one of my groups. He had something to say, which was interesting to me. So I looked at his website, which is called Aquarius Papers. And he must be an Aquarius, or otherwise he wouldn't be calling his blog that, I'm assuming. And I'm an Aquarius, so I think that was one of the reasons that I was drawn to his blog. But I've, found myself repeatedly going back to his blog because he has a lot of educational content, and he brings a lot of new ideas and understandings of astrology. And I am constantly learning new things, and I love to read about astrology and look at different perspectives. And so when I was coming to this presentation, I was like, you know what, I really need to give back to him. I see that there's a Saturn book that he has. So I'm going to purchase this book and share some of the quotes that resonated with me. But it's a really great book, and it's full of great information. So I encourage you to either check out his blog, at least Astrology Papers, or look at his book and buy it. It's really good. But I'm going to at this point speak to some quotes that really resonated with me. The first one is a good transition here from the mythology and what we know about the planet to talk about Saturn and how it works as an archetype in our lives. As we can infer from Saturn's mythological correspondences, Saturn teaches us the agricultural principles we are learning in the garden of life. Saturn teaches us perfect timing on when to till the soil of our personalities, when to fertilize, when to plant, when to weed, and when to do pest control. Saturn teaches us when to live by the rules and when to suspend them. It teaches when and how to renew our lives, when to give gifts, when to exercise free speech, and when the gates will swing open and we are free to live a better life. Saturn shows us the path to liberation. Saturn represents how we choose to define our personal reality. All the inner planets show us the parts of that reality, from our innermost experiences, or the moon. The moon is very much related to Saturn, to the limits of where our fear rubs up against our freedom, Saturn. Through Saturn, we come to know when it's time to take a dispassionate look at circumstances or people and find an objective view of these things we do and do not need to be involved with. Our inner Saturn teaches us to face things exactly as they are without fearing what we're seeing or might see. Saturn helps us restructure unhelpful mental patterns so we can find clarity and understanding as we move through difficult feelings, whether they originated in the past or they're coming up due to present issues. Saturn can also represent societal expectations or the consensus. That's from me. And I wanted to talk about how he views it, or what his thoughts are on societal expectations or the consensus. Throughout life, we learn to accept that our truth, our feelings, and how we choose to do our being are okay, even when no one in our family or anyone else validated them and do not approve of them now. Saturn may accompany months or years of pain as we shed an ocean of tears when feeling isolated, alone, and misunderstood. But as we willingly embrace our inner Saturn, we become a more understanding and compassionate person. Saturn allows us to stand secure in our own sense of purpose, free from fear of others' disapproval. If we're willing to walk the walk, learning all we must learn, then joy comes after the sadness is spent, along with a new light in life. Saturn helps us to take the time to understand and care for those things we believe are important. This creates the ability to know what really matters in any given experience. As we learn what's important and how to take care of the things which truly matter to us, we naturally encounter others who are learning how to take care of themselves and what matters to them. Over time, instead of asking for love or feeling unloved, we learn how to love and be loving according to the dictates of our higher self. That's when we are attuned to the heart of nature herself, where we will find healing lasting beyond time. Okay, so those are the main themes, but now I want to go into some quotes about the Saturn opposition or Saturn transits in general. It's not just about this opposition. So significant planetary transits often bring important reminders of past events and echoes of past experiences, depending on the planetary quality. To a greater or lesser degree, all transits and progressions bring up echoes of memories of patterns from the past, showing us how they influence our subconscious mind and subsequent responses. The evolution of our perception is a continuum. So from one angle, we can track anything we confront at any point in life to its time source and learn which patterns need transmuting. And this is the part that I think is most helpful to using the astrological chart and the cycles that it represents, is really tracking the cycles over time. because they'll be able to inform you about what you're developing. And they're also able to shed light on the themes and the patterns that you keep playing out over and over again. And either you're stuck in those patterns, the same things are coming up, or you're kind of going deeper into those patterns and looking at these patterns in a variety of ways and deepening your experience to hopefully ascend the patterns. Because really, astrology is a representation of the energy that we come into, and then the cycles we go through, and what are the things that we're trying to develop, and what are the patterns that we're stuck in. And if you're conscious of them, I think it's just helpful to, first of all, to take a more detached look at the pain that sometimes you're feeling, and to really lean in, I guess, to those experiences and try to extract as much understanding of why you have certain patterns so that you can ascend them and look at it from a more, like he said, from a more dispassionate view, from a more detached view, so that you can keep from kind of identifying with those patterns and get locked into them. So that's why I use astrology. I think it's the most useful, is just the study of those cycles. Okay, so a couple more quotes from him. Through the heaviness we feel while going through a Saturn lesson, we are slowly but surely taught to see what is obsolete and no longer needed. This allows us to eliminate methodically and deliberately unfulfilling ways of life. All difficult periods challenge us, to find new ways to live our evolved spiritual integrity. When it's time to focus our life trajectory in new directions, it usually means saying goodbye to old ways as newer, more important life experiences occur. It is very human to become attached to familiar ways of doing our being and familiar faces we meet along the way. However, because life involves leaving behind many things, ideas, and people as we age, it is natural to feel a twinge of sadness when one chapter ends and another begins, and grieve those things we have lost, if only for a short while. Sadness and grief are a natural part of the human condition. They show us the way to a greater, deeper, and wider love. Once we get over judgments about whether we're grieving in the right way or conforming to the standards which consensus reality seeks to impose on our evolving perspective. And we must evolve when it's time to say goodbye. And that's the crux. You know, we like consistency, even though we're not consistent beings. We like to cling to this idea that we're consistent. And that's why we get so attached to these patterns and these belief systems, and they become outworn, and they keep us stuck. And sometimes if we're not really attuned to Saturn lessons, Pluto will come in and decimate us and make us move, so we really have to, or we have the opportunity to take a step back and really observe what's going on inside of us, and use the tools like astrology to really understand what's happening. And then, over time, be able to become more and more detached from our rote patterns and embrace something new. The new that Uranus is showing us. And I like to leave this part by a quote that talks about the interplay of Saturn versus Uranus. Because Saturn and Uranus opposition in our midlife happen virtually on top of each other. Whereas Saturn shows us reality, Uranus offers us inspiration and flashes of genius. While Saturn binds us to the causes and effects related to destiny, Uranus offers us ongoing individualizing experiences where we demonstrate our freedom to cut loose from those things which trap us in restrictive patterns inhibiting our growth. While Saturn binds us through fear of the unknown, Uranus throws us into the unknown now with every breath we take. Saturn and Uranus represent the boundaries of our imagination and the gateway to creative individuality when we learn to use these energies wisely, each in the right way and time. Our potential is limitless, and each thing we master acquired through practice and patience becomes our individual path to freedom and higher purpose. Okay, now let's jump into a chart example. Like my other videos, I'm using my own chart because I'm intimately familiar with my chart, and also I've studied my cycles pretty extensively, although I'm always learning something new about them. So each time I go back, I get a new insight, which is helpful. And I've also done this for a few other people, going through their cycles with them. And really, it takes a lot of work on the person themselves, because they really need to go back and understand what was present in their life at that time, understand the themes, and then we can review them as they play out over time. So my opposition happened in January 2019, approximately 6 months after the first hit of my Uranus opposition and 3 months before its final hit. So it happened really in between, right in the middle of my Uranus opposition, which I think is interesting to think about, because really Uranus is kind of that energy to just go for something that might have been building up for us over time, which it was for me. It was building up, and really provide the energy to go towards something new. And then, kind of Saturn comes in and goes, uh-oh, but you really have got to pay attention to your responsibilities. Are you sure you're going in this new direction? You need to build some foundational structures. You really need to think about this before you go off and head into a new direction. And I think that was true in my experience. It was, like I said, it was around the time of my Uranus opposition. I had fled New York City finally, after really needing to leave for feeling the need to escape for a good 5 years. And I was just starting to investigate my Christian roots in Austin, Texas. And this is important because this really is a part of my journey. So Saturn here is at the top of my chart. And it's in the 9th house. And so that, and my chart is very, I have a lot of family karma in my chart, and a lot of experiences through my midlife that I was coming back to take a second look at. And I think a lot of people experience this in their midlife transits. If they have not healed from the wounds of their past, this is an opportunity to revisit them. And very interesting story of how I came in to really go back to my Christian roots, because that was a source of quite a wound for me. My mother my family was evangelical, and I had a harsh, experience with the religion that she, basically, I feel like I was indoctrinated with. There was a lot of shame in that religion, and very rigid kind of rules. There wasn't a lot of understanding of really the deeper layers of Christianity, or I wasn't taught them. And so it was all about, like, if you don't believe exactly the way that we believe, then you're going to hell. And that was the fear of Saturn, or you're going to hell. Saturn rules my IC. So, and it's right here in the 9th house, and it's ruled by my moon. And so, the moon is representative of your mother. And I'll go deeper into this. The moon squares my nodes, and the south node is ruled by Mercury, which is in the 4th house. And that's about family and the family, mental framework that I was born into. And I'm kind of reviewing this at this time. So I had started to study the Kabbalah a couple of years earlier. A friend of mine invited me, which is very important because the projector is, works off the invitation. So when I look back, this was a very important entry into what I have been going through my midlife, which is the Kabbalah classes that I went to. One of the most important phrases that they brought up was, "Why is this in my movie?" And that was like, whoa, yes. Why is this pattern keeps showing up, through my job, experiences that I had had. I was like, oh my God, okay, why is this in my movie? So when I moved to Austin, Texas, I was really searching for that Kabbalah community again. But in Austin, Texas, first of all, there's not a lot of Jews, and this is a Jewish mysticism, but also there's not a lot of Jews that study the Kabbalah. There's a specific um, specific tradition in the Jewish faith that is more aligned to Jewish mysticism. But it was a very tiny group when I arrived there. But at that one of the group meetings, I met this person who kind of changed my trajectory. She invited me to this Christian church, which I would have never have gone to without this invitation. First of all, it was Christian. I was like, no, I did not like organized religion at all. I was very suspicious of anything Christian oriented. And it was called the Church of Conscious Harmony. So it sounded a little cultish to me. I was like, okay, I'm going to go check it out. And right away, I felt resonance. And the reason that I felt resonance was because they were looking at Christianity from a several lens, but it was much deeper. It was a little bit more intellectual. They studied Gurdjieff, the Fourth Way, which I started to study. It was also deepening the understanding of Christian roots. They also did they taught what they call centering prayer there. It's a type of meditation which is very close to transcendental meditation. And I had explored, Buddhism and meditation prior, but it never stuck. And for some reason, this meditation stuck for me. And throughout this understanding of this new, deeper understanding of Christianity, I was also given the tools to be able to create distance from becoming identified with all of the mental things that were going on in my mind, and also my feelings, which I had cut myself off from and was drinking to escape from. And so through meditation, the practice of meditation, and through Gurdjieff's work, I was able to start practicing passenger consciousness. And so it was a real good entryway into kind of rediscovering and healing some of the wounds that had been created in my childhood. But also at this time, and what I would say was my external Saturn lesson, is that my son, who is only 7 at this time, started to experience intense feelings about his identity. And I had to I had to face that identity struggle very quickly after I moved to Austin and started rediscovering this church. I really had to pay attention to him. And I didn't know this at the time. I only discovered this later, that he was going through his Saturn square, because you go through different developmental cycles of Saturn. And not only was he going through his Saturn square, but I realized that my first cross-country move, which really impacted me, was also during my first Saturn square. So although his experiences were very much different than mine, it still was following a similar pattern. So it made me kind of wake up later in retrospect. But this time really woke me up to some of the hangups I still had. I've always been this type of person who's kind of like at the edge of of something. I'm different. I was brought up in a very conservative family, and a Christian family. It still impacts me and my thinking. But I was different. And so then I came and moved across the country, experienced another kind of way of life, and expanded my mind a little bit, and kind of got more aligned to more of a, materialistic, scientific mental framework in technology. And I had some conflicting emotions, because I had one part of me really thought I was open-minded, but when I had to struggle with this new reality of my son and what he was going through. And I don't really think you understand this until you experience it. That's why I really have a hard time with people having these really strong opinions who haven't had a personal experience, because you just don't get it. And I had a choice at that time. I was either going to stand up for my child and what he was going through and his individual experience. He's Uranus on his midheaven, or I wasn't going to. I was going to repress him and make him fall into line with where I wanted him to go. And it was a really hard confrontation for me, not only because I was like, "Oh, who am I really?" And I had to really confront my insecurities about what people thought of me. And also, I had to revisit some of my sibling relationships and my mother's relationship to say, are you going to accept my son this way or not? And it was a really intense time. And I realized that I was very much attached to this idea of what people thought of me. And I really need to work on that. And I had to go through all of those conflicting feelings inside of myself. And it was, one of those experiences that I probably needed to go through. But let's look at my chart a little bit closer. So, according to traditional astrologers, Saturn up here at the top of my chart is not only in its sign of detriment, but it's also retrograde. And I'm a night birth, so I have what they call a night chart. So Saturn is out of sect. And so according to traditional astrologers, this is quite a destructive force in my life, Saturn. And I can say, from my own experience, I can see the destructive influences quite readily. I was the fourth child in a family of 9 children. I was demonstrably different as their first projector child in this family. If you know anything about human design, you know that projector children, it's an energetic type, but they're only 22% of the population, and they just take in information. They respond in a very different way to life and to people around them, and they don't have the consistent access to energy like most of the people that are born. And so I was very different. Both of my grandfathers died between the ages of 2 and 3, and both of my parents had very conflicting relationships with their fathers. And I know that they were probably going through their own internal crises during that time. And my mom was also, I was the 4th child, and she had her 5th child when I was 3 years old. And my parents specifically had a lot of power struggles. They were constantly battling. I'm sure they were battling at this time. Probably, I think around 4, they moved across the state, and my mom at that time was going through her own internal struggles about her own identity as a mother, and she really wanted to do something in her life, and that was a source of a lot of friction in my parents' marriage. And because they had all these children, but my mom wanted to be her own person and have her own career. And so she became a nurse and worked as a nurse, and then went back to school to become a doctor. And so they were both very busy. And so I did not get a lot of personal care growing up. And my family life was quite chaotic. And, there was a lot of battles going on in my family. You can see Mars is opposing Saturn, and Mars is in the 3rd house of siblings. And if you look at it in another way, Mars, whole house, Mars could be in the 4th house. So there's a lot of conflict in my family. But my family at the same time, because my parents weren't home, there was not a lot of consistency. There was a lot of authoritarian controlling behavior and teaching, but there was not a lot of consistency around that. So, me as an Aquarian was like, this doesn't make sense. And I started to rebel in my teenage years. And throughout my life, I've had these confrontations with authorities around the topic of dogma and their responsibilities and principles, and whether they care or not about people. And, I've been digging into the various ways that the I Ching, the hexagrams of the I Ching, are layered over the astrological wheel. And there's one way, there's the human design. This is where the entry point into that was I started studying human design, and human design is kind of an agglomerate, a synthesis of different traditions. And Ra has his own way of lining up the hexagrams. But I recently discovered this astrologer, Robin Armstrong, that has his own way of lining up the hexagrams. And according to astrology, it just makes a lot more sense. So I've been studying that. And so these, when I'm talking about the hexagrams, is from his point of view, but I also use Ra's descriptions of some of these hexagrams and lines because I think they're quite good. And I wanted to pair them because I thought that they really described these positions very well. So according to Robin Armstrong's lineup of the hexagrams, my natal Saturn is in the hexagram 50, which is called the cauldron. And it is about responsibility and nurturing. And it is in line 1, which is a foundational line. Ra Huru he calls it the line of the immigrant. A sentence used to describe the line stood out to me: a dissatisfaction with the original values that demands refinement. So yes, in human design, I have the channel of judgment. It's a very funny channel, but I can see it in me. So there's this kind of judgment that sits, and people can see it in me, that sits up at top and is like, that's not right. This should be done instead. And so throughout my life, I've just kind of been really going toward creating my own value system by understanding other people's value systems and what they think, so that I can come to my own conclusions of what matters to me. So a lot of the times there's these experiences of running up against authority figures or religious dogmas and saying, no, that's not right. That's not how you should lead. That's not how you should teach. There's all these things, and there's a lot of judgment that goes along with that, which I'm really learning about myself. So, transiting Saturn at this time, which is very near my Mars, my natal Mars, which makes sense. It's opposite Saturn, and I have a Mars-Saturn opposition, and it's in the hexagram. Both of these, Mars and Saturn, are in hexagram called difficulty at the beginning, but it's in the same, it's in different lines of the same hexagram. So the line that Saturn is in and transiting is in line 1. And of course, because it's the opposition, it's again foundational. And according to Ra, this is called the line of synthesis. It's the recognition of confusion. And there's some confusion going on. There's some confusion going on about, what's happening to me and what is this all about? And what is my sun going through? And what does it mean? And from the perspective of my Mars, my natal Mars, it's in line 4. And then line 4 is projecting out this confusion to others. And Ra labels this line a charisma, which I think is funny because people tend to be attracted to this energy in order to provide guidance. Then the person may be confused or not, and the guidance can be accepted or not. And so I have had a lot of experience, especially since my child was born, with people, just random strangers coming up and telling me what I should do, how I should raise my child. And again, I was confronting this, oh, this is the way you should raise your child. Oh, this, a lot of judgment around that. So you can be the judger, or you can project the judgment on somebody else. The opposition is projecting, but it can be very real that those people come in and they apply judgment to you. But that's the experience that you're supposed to experience to kind of balance those energies. Okay, what's right for me, and what's right for me to do from an external point of view. And so you're learning about that. And then Saturn, I had pointed out over here this Moon Mars conjunction in the 6th house, which is really aspecting my nodes, but also it's aspecting the Saturn Mars. It's squaring the Saturn Mars opposition. And so I wanted to go over, what my natal moon means in this 5th house. First of all, it's squaring the nodes. So a lot of I've had a hard experience with my mother. Moon is your mother, but also around security issues. And the moon, according to according to Robin Armstrong, excuse me, the hexagrams is lined up to 37, which is called the clan or the family, and it's in line 3. And that's interesting to me because of the fact that, yes, I have a lot of family karma that I've been going through and trying to examine, trying to figure out ways around and ways to ascend this family karma. And it's very interesting that the moon is in this hexagram. So it's in line 3, which is Ra calls the line of adaptation. And he calls it, or it is the line of adaptation, but he calls it even-handedness, or understanding what behavior is appropriate or not to access the resources needed. And it's true throughout my life because I'm a Libra rising. I've had to move a lot. So I've had to adapt to other people. And I have an innate sense of what people want and how can I fit into that framework so that I can access what I need. And I wouldn't describe this as a very, people sometimes describe a Libra as manipulative. It's not very manipulative. It's just an innate sense of, okay, I understand how to adapt to this situation and how to really understand what this other person needs from me very quickly. But I would have to say that that only lasts for so long. And then I assert my independence. And that's where problems can come out. People are surprised by my own independence, and I have a fierce independent side to me, and so that can cause problems. And so as my midlife journey, I've just been trying to navigate that and figure out how to show up as myself and balance that, what other people need versus what I need. And so I've highlighted, like I said, the Mars and Moon over here, and they're conjunct in my 6th house. And at the time, I was really going out on my own and trying to figure out new ways of living, new patterns to create. And I was going out on my own in my own business. And so it's very 6th house oriented, but really this experience with my child is shown here too, because Mars is in hexagram 41, and that's labeled decrease in lines 2, which is labeled caution, but it's more descriptive to describe it as throwing caution to the wind. Ra describes the Martian energy as projecting one's feelings outward. And the moon in hexagram 19, which is called approach, and according to Ra, it's about wanting and needing. And it's in the line 6, which is a recluse line. And I would describe it as me, when I was decided to stand up for my child, I was really not only wanting to stand up for him, but stand up for him in a very public way. And again, this was a time, and like I said, I was confronting my family, and it was like, you accept him or not, I'm out of here. There was kind of like this, throughout my life, it's kind of been like, you do this or I do this. There's no wiggle room. And I've been really looking at that myself. It's like you are either here for me or you're against me. It's very divisive in that way. And so, and at that point, I was either you're here for me or you're against me, and I'm going to put that out on the table, and that's it. And I just shut people out of my life in that way. And I have gone through an experience. I think a lot of people in their midlife really needs to separate from people so they can come to understand what is needed in their own life, who they are. And I've definitely gone through those experiences. I experienced a lot of internal and external struggles about the nature of my childhood identity at this time and my own identity. And I kept a lot of people at arm's length because of the various really negative reactions that I was receiving about my child. So there was this like kind of like, this proactive defensiveness to me. And I needed to separate from the consensus, and I needed to separate from my family because of the visceral and divisive reactions that I was getting. But also I had my own divisive communication going on. So really had to accept that part. These struggles contributed to my slowly discarding old unhealthy patterns and coming to terms with my own values outside of the consensus that was clearly divided in my own environment, sixth house. But I'm not going to say that this happened overnight. This has happened throughout my journey as I've really, there's been a lot of lessons that I've learned through this 7-year cycle. I'm in my Chiron return right now. And so I'm sure that there's more that I'm unpacking, but this is one of the ways and one of the things that you can kind of confront in your cycle. Okay, so that's enough. And I will be reviewing the Jupiter return that comes after the Saturn opposition, and then finally the Chiron return that brings us to the end of what they call the midlife transits. It's quite intense, and I have talked to a variety of people that describe it that way, even if they don't know about astrology. I can see it out on social media, and people attribute it to like kind of the menopause for women, and people call it the empty nest syndrome and things like that. And so you can analyze this in a variety of ways, but I think from an astrological perspective, it's a great way to do it. So I'm going to be offering, like I said, some content if you sign up to my newsletter about how you can work your way through these cycles if you don't know already. So sign up, please. Or if you got something out of this video, please like or subscribe. I will be putting out more content as I can, as my energy allows. But I appreciate the time, and I hope this was helpful to you. Bye. Many blessings.